That's good. All right, so what we're going to talk about today is back in 2012, right after I retired, we decided to take a run down the Intra Coastal Waterway. We had met with a number of people over the prior couple of years, mostly through the Seven Seas Cruising Association, to decide if a cruising lifestyle on a seasonal basis made sense for us. At the time, as we do now, we're living in Connecticut, and our goal was to head down to Florida and to cross to the Bahamas. The plan was to basically take our time, not to rush, but to go down to to Florida, leave the boat, come home for the holidays, and then return after the new year and take the boat to Pandora to the Bahamas. And that's what we did. We'd spent 2.5 months. And we did nowadays when I do the run going south, I go around Montauk and down from there. But at the time, we were just taking our time, and our son Christopher was a graduate student at Columbia, and we wanted to be able to wave goodbye to him. And this, in fact, was a picture taken by him up near Gracie Mansion. That's a different boat than we have now. That's a Saga 43. So you're going to see boats back and forth between the Saga and the Aerodyne. But this is our story of that run. A little bit of background: the Intracoastal Waterway is 3,000 miles, and mileage on the ICW is not nautical, it's statute. So when I talk about 50 miles, I mean 50 statute miles. And the ICW basically starts in Newport News at mile marker number 1 off of Hospital Point, and runs all the way down through the Keys, and then back up and around the Gulf of Mexico, nearly to the Mississippi River. So in theory, you can do all the way from Virginia all the way around to the Mississippi without ever going outside. Of course, notice I left out the New Jersey coast. You have to do that outside. The ICW was begun in planning in 1807, and construction began in 1824. But it really wasn't until the advent of World War II and the fear of U-boats sinking American shipping that it really became completed. But it's been kept up since then. It still has a good deal of it is used for commercial traffic. And it's obviously very popular with snowbirds. There's a controlling depth throughout of 6 to 8 feet. They say 15, but believe me, it's a lot less. And in some cases at low tide, especially in Georgia, you're going to run into 4 feet. So you have to play the tides. The tide varies a great deal on the ICW. Through the Carolinas, it's about 18 inches. And in Georgia, it's upwards of 9+ feet. But more often than not, the bulk of it is around 1.5 feet or so. The nominal bridge height is 65 feet, and that's supposedly at mean high water. Each of their bridges have a board on them to give you that height, but they're sort of accurate, not completely. And so you want to be looking at each bridge as you come up to it to make sure that you can see that board and tell where the water line is. There's a couple of bridges that are a little less than 65 feet, and one that's 10 feet less, and that's just north of Miami. And that, I don't know if it was a mistake or what happened, but to go from Fort Lauderdale down to Miami, that 20 miles, you have to go outside unless you have a mast height of less than 55 feet. The ICW is very much different than what you kind of experience here in the Northeast in terms of cost. Most of the marinas are quite inexpensive, $1.50, sometimes $1, sometimes free. A lot of towns have free dockage to encourage people to come. As cruisers, it's a very, very different experience than, say, being up around Martha's Vineyard, where you feel like, they're doing you a favor by letting you come into their harbor. They really are very, very happy to see you. They really want the snowbirds to come, and every year thousands of boats go back and forth, and they're begging you to stop in their town. And as I mentioned, the tides vary a great deal. In the Carolinas, with that 18 inches can mean the difference between running aground and not running aground. And so we generally try to play the tides as best we can. Not always so easy, because there's many inlets that you can't even begin to go through with anything larger than a kayak. And so you've got water coming into the side of the ICW every couple of miles or even every few hundred feet through the marshes that where the raw water runs into the ICW on the flood and then runs right back out on the ebb. And so as a result, there's a lot of shoaling, a lot of sandbars. And I can tell you of many examples where we were chugging along in the middle of the channel and then just stopped absolutely dead. In fact, one time Brenda was trying to take a picture of a dolphin and turned her sights for just a moment away from the charts, and we stopped dead. And I nearly fell off the bow of the boat because I was watching the dolphin as well. But with the tides and a draft of 6 feet or less, you can pretty well do this. And I say 6 feet or less because we've done it in the 6.5 foot Aerodyne, and it was a whole lot tougher than in our 6 foot draft saga. So Newport News, Virginia, right near the naval base, is mile marker number 1. And by the time you get to Miami, it's 1,089. It's a long way. And if you do the math, yeah.
Finally, after all of these outstanding presentations, have discovered you have made a mistake.
Oh.
What is that?
I know, Brenda, can you believe it? It's not Newport News, it's Portsmouth, Virginia.
Portsmouth.
And,
oh, okay.
Yeah. And I know this because my sister lived in Portsmouth for many years, and they actually had a salty dog event at their store 6 or 8 years ago, which you might have been at, actually, I don't know. But Portsmouth, Virginia is literally across from Norfolk.
Yeah.
It's right across from the Norfolk Naval Shipyard, which is 0.
You know, you're right. Norfolk. Okay, take that.
Yep.
Point corrected. Okay. Well,
Okay.
anyway,
All right.
the key is, well, you caught me on that. Maybe that won't be the only one. So
no, I suspect it's the only one.
So the one of the things you want to keep in mind as you're doing this is the maximum you can really do in the course of a day on the ICW is 55 miles. And unlike, say, at the eastern end of Long Island Sound, where you can time things to go with the tide, every time you go past an inlet, on one side of the inlet, the tide's running one way. On the other side of the inlet, it's running the other way. So it may be, if it's flooding, it's going to maybe flooding north from the inlet and south from that inlet. So you're going to be, overall, you're going to be bucking the tide for probably about half of every day. So in all honesty, you've got to count on a 50-mile day. Multiply that by the number of miles, and it's 20 days of actually moving. And so when we did the trip, we did it in 2.5 months, because we would push for a couple of days and then hang out. I mean, it would be crime to not enjoy the shoreside attractions on the ICW. There are such wonderful towns. And when you think about it, our country was founded on the water. So you'll see some of the most amazing history as you go around up and down the Intra Coastal Waterway. There's a number of charts and guidebooks you're going to want to have on hand. Down in the lower right, I mentioned Active Captain, and I can't say that I'm all that familiar with what it's like to use that now. But when we did the ICW, it was really important. It gives you, it's a crowdsource of what's going on in the ICW as recently as when the last person posted something. A good source of information is going to be the MapTech Embassy Cruising Guides, and we had all of them. They're well worth investing in. And there are also books out there that's like a ditch kit, where it's just actually a flip chart that you just flip page by page by page as you go down the ICW, just like driving down a highway. And you might want to look into what's available there. But I can't say that I am an expert on current ICW, except to say that I keep my charts open on my plotter. I also keep my iPad open with the Navionics current charts with Active Captain on it, and then I have the paper books as well. They're quite handy to have, and these spiral bound books are fairly expensive. They're about $40–50 a piece, but they give you a lot of information on individual bridge heights, opening times, as well as marinas and phone numbers. And you're going to want to be thinking about, as you're going down, what happens if I have to get there by 4:30 because it's going to get dark in November. That's the time of day that it gets dark. So you want to think about what can I reach in that light? You don't want to move on the ICW in the dark. So have a spot picked and then maybe another spot. And these charts all have anchorages noted on them. As you're moving down the ICW, I recommend that you consider various types of groups to participate in. The SSCA has a GAM late September of this year at the Maryland Yacht Club, which is just north of Annapolis. Go down ahead of time, maybe arrange for a slip someplace. There's a lot of slips available in people's homes, out backyards. You can get them through Craigslist and so forth. But plan to be there for those couple of days. You'll meet people and you'll spend a lot of time with them. Also, go to the boat show. Get there maybe as much as a week ahead of time and snag a mooring right out in front. It is an amazing experience to watch them put that show together when they bring in those long docks and one after another, and then have the boats come in and then close them in with other docks. Go from there down to Hampton, to the Hampton, Virginia Cruisers Week, which is a couple of days. I don't have the dates on that, but you go to the pier down there. I think it's $1.50 a night. Stay for a couple of days, have dinners. They have the town really throws a real welcome out for cruisers. And then consider if you're not going to go home for Thanksgiving, go to either to St. Mary's or Vero Beach in Florida to participate in Thanksgiving. Thanks St. Mary's, which is right on the border of Florida and Georgia, they shut the whole town down and they bring turkeys to this restaurant hotel. The townspeople supply the free turkeys. You bring a dish and you buy drinks from the restaurant, and there'll be, at least when we were there were some 200 people there. It was really wonderful. And then, of course, Vero, if you make it all that way, we only made it to St. Mary's by Georgia by Thanksgiving, but if you make it to Vero, that's a very popular spot, also known as Velcro Beach, because most people can't leave once they get there. And there's a great shuttle bus program around town and so forth and so on. They're very friendly for cruisers. So this is us. Chris, you'll recognize this picture. You took it. This was at the Fairweather Yacht Club, where Brenda and I first started sailing back when we were just newly married back in the 70s.
Well, that photo's not from then.
No, it's not. That was, we decided to begin our trip visiting Chris and his wife, Pat, who we had done a lot of cruising with together on Long Island Sound. So that was our very first night. And after that, we went on our way. Of course, we have a different boat now. This is Pandora, an Aerodyne 47. You'll see a lot of pictures of her in this color, probably with the name Ariel on the side. But now, of course, she looks a little bit different. We've had her painted. One of the things I'm going to talk about during this discussion is making the boat a home. Regardless of your boat type or size, the idea is to make it as comfortable as you can. This is a bit of a dated shot for us. Nowadays, we have really nice pillows that have been made for it. We actually have new china. These are melamine, but the ones we have now are a little higher quality. But the point is we try to make the place as comfortable as we can. You want to have good sheets. Get you some sort of a memory foam top for the cushion. Maybe consider getting one of the spring programs, the Frolies, that go underneath the mattress to keep humidity from building up and getting moldy. Because if you sleep on a mattress every single day, it's humid on the boat. And we've never had a problem with mildew under the mattress because we have these plastic springs that hold the whole thing up, and it makes it more comfortable. Another thing that we do is we buy the very best quality mattress pad we can get and put it over the whole thing, and it just makes everything a lot more comfortable.
Bob, what was the name of that stuff that you're putting under the mattress?
It's called a Froley. If you remind me after this, I will send you a link to it. They sell them at Defender. I actually saw them. It's a little spring-loaded thing that you put into a frame, a plastic frame, and custom sort of cut them to match the mattress, and it holds the mattress up by an inch off of the wood.
Yeah, I did that on my boat too, and there's like a grid. You can lock them in to accommodate the V berth and things like that. So yeah, they were a really good enhancement.
It works really well. And also to that point, I'm going to talk about comfort. It's really important. And keep in mind, you're doing this run in the fall. It gets cold. In fact, you won't believe how chilly it gets, even down on the Florida-Georgia border. One of the things I'm going to talk about also is some recommended equipment. I've talked before about having a good dinghy. It's a little bit less important on the ICW than it is in the Bahamas, but it is good to have a good dinghy and a good outboard motor, because it's your car. You want to make sure that you are able to get someplace when you want to. Nothing is more annoying than getting up in the morning and being in a rush to get going, but you have to do an errand and then your engine won't start. And these recommendations are assuming some offshore portions. Most people don't do the ICW year after year after year. It can be pretty mind-numbing to be motoring and to steer day after day after day. So let's assume for the moment that you're going to be doing some offshore portions. And heading north in the spring, it's pretty easy to jump outside. And you can get a much longer weather window in the spring than you can in the fall. It's also a good idea, especially offshore, to have AIS. And we've talked over the last couple of months a lot about overnight sailing, and having the ability to see a boat, a ship, see its name, know what direction it's going without having to just strain and figure out which way the lights are showing, be able to call them and to tell them you're there, makes night sailing much, much more relaxing. I'm also a believer that plan for the worst and hope for the best when it comes to offshore sailing. So get yourself a raft. An EPIRB, I think, is vital. I wouldn't go outside of 15 miles from shore, outside of VHF range, without having an EPIRB. You know, the new ones today, they have batteries that you can change yourself, and they're a couple $100, and you just re-register it every year with the Coast Guard. It's really great. Get yourself a good inflatable life vest with a personal locator beacon if you want to spring for that. Put it inside the life vest. It's just one more thing to keep you comfortable that if the worst happens, that it won't be fatal. Also, think about making that boat solar dependent. 500 to 600 watts will run most everything on a reasonable sized boat. And then also, the weather in the fall is very changeable. Subscribe to a weather service. I believe Chris Parker is a terrific value for $300 a year to be able to get a daily email catered to your particular area, and also speak to him on the phone or on the radio if you have a sideband. And LED everything. The place I've gone to is superbrightled.com, and they have they're a kind of an OEM manufacturer of every imaginable kind of light, and I've converted everything on the boat. And get yourself a transponder. DeLorme is what we have, a Garmin DeLorme. We've had a Spot. Some people use the Iridium Go. The point is, people will want to follow you. I remember when Chris on the call here, and Pat did their trip way before these sorts of things existed, even before email was practical. We knew they were going away for a year, and it drove us nuts that we couldn't follow them. So nowadays, it's very easy to follow people. And when you think about where that solar is going to go, if you have davits hanging off the back of the boat, that's a perfect place. That's a 300-watt panel. Or even now, they have panels that are just as efficient as these hard panels that are flexible, that you can actually have sewn right into your Dodger or into the top of it. I recommend jack lines. You want to stay on board. It's especially important if you're offshore. Put them in the cockpit, put them in deck. As George knows, we are very tough on that when we're offshore. Nobody goes on deck ever, and certainly not even in the cockpit without clipping on. Get yourself a dual lanyard, 3 and 6 foot, good quality with shard or something like that lanyard. It's very important to have good security. And I would also recommend a full enclosure. It gets cold in the winter. On our first trip south, we nearly froze to death. I couldn't believe how cold it was, and we had no enclosure at all. And consider putting in an engine-driven heater. A car heater is the same principle. It hooks directly to the cooling system of the engine, and it just blows air through a small radiator. They're one of the very few things you'll put on your boat that will cost hundreds, not thousands. And every engine, every Yanmar in particular, I know, is set up for this. It's just a matter of getting an engine guy to plumb it and put some valves, and then you can run the heat before it goes through the exchanger out over the transom. You can run it through this. And Ours puts out something like 30,000 BTUs, and I think I paid $200 for it. Also consider a propane heater, and there's one I'll show you in a moment that is set up so that if the CO2 level gets too high, it'll actually shut itself off. It's the only one that is approved for use indoors a home. We don't have a house generator, but having a generator of some sort, we have a Honda 2000, and between that and our 600 watts of solar, we're in pretty good shape most all the time. You'd be astounded at the kind of power you can save by just having LEDs. And you will use a lot more power than you use for day sailing, because you're probably going to have a computer running a lot of the time, and you're going to have your blender so you can make your mojitos and all that kind of stuff. So trust me, you're going to want to have a generator and a good inverter. Our inverters.
On that point, one question on that is if you're doing the ICW, you're basically under power all day long, every single day. So it becomes less of an issue, this generator question, or solar and various things like that.
Well, solar is important because keep in mind, you want to give it months to do this trip to really enjoy it. And you're very likely going to be anchored for a week or on a mooring in a city for a week, and you don't want to have to sit there and run your generator every day. And the inverter, Brenda wants to be clean. Heck, I want to be clean, but I don't need a hairdryer, but she does.
Well,
And
not anymore, but yes,
Yeah,
I used
right.
to be married to my hairdryer.
but one way or the other, if you're cold and you get out of the shower and it's and you're trying to be comfortable before dinner, you don't want to sit there with wet hair. So it works well to have that that ability. And with a 4 kilowatt, I mean, a hairdryer draws 1.5 kilowatts all by itself, like almost 100 amps at 24 volts. So it's a big draw. And we also keep a small portable unit that runs our laptops. And the reason I do that is because our big inverter, just an idle, draws 4 amps, and that's just not efficient use of power. So we use that portable one. I have several USB and cigarette lighter type adapters at the helm station that I can plug something into. And then with an extension cord, you can reach your laptop. And don't underestimate the amount of time you'll spend staying in touch with friends and so forth and so on. Also, it's not always convenient to go to a marina, so I keep flexible jugs and a big funnel that fits right into my deck plate for filling the water for my water tank. And because I would much rather get in the dinghy, go to a marina and pick up 25, 30 gallons of water with one trip, come back, dump it in, and Brenda can have her shower without me being a water Nazi. I also recommend a handheld depth finder, because a lot of the places that you're going to anchor on the ICW are small, and you've got to be prepared for when the wind dies and you swing. And so it's much easier to get in your dinghy with this little handheld depth finder, which is like $200 or something, and then just motor around and say, is it shallow? Is it deep? What's behind me? This way you don't have to worry so much, because the charts aren't always very accurate. But one thing to keep in mind is it's all sand and mud. So it's not like you're going to wreck the boat by running aground, but it's annoying if you get up in the morning and you can't go. And also, and this is just sort of a general safety thing, get a softwood plug for every one of your through hulls and drill a hole in the top of it and wire it. Put a piece of lanyard right on that through hull, so that if you've got a bilge filling with water, you won't have those things floating all over the place. You'll be able to say, yep, I've got the right one. You cut the hose and you jam it in with a hammer. This is the little thing called a heater buddy. It's made by a company called Mr. Heater, and what I do is you can use it in the cockpit on a really cold day and just get those little camp propane heaters. It eats them up pretty quick, but the point is, when you're cold, you're cold. And then this other one it's not the exact unit we have, but you get the gist of it. You mount it behind a bulkhead and run pipes to your engine, and then have a return, and it puts out a stunning amount of heat. Well, the question is, how long does it take? We took 2.5 months to make the trip. And keep that in mind, I mentioned earlier, you can only make 50 miles a day, and we found that it was better to push for a couple of days, get someplace we really wanted to be, and then stay for a week. You can do it in installments. Heck, you can do it in, you can leave your boat halfway there and just go home and come back in the spring if you wanted to. There's many places. These are all very popular areas, vacation areas, big cities, and you can fly home very easily or rent a car, not a problem. We're renting cars to do something. You might want to consider running offshore for part of it. The first time you do the ICW, it's so novel, it might not be such a bad idea to do the entire thing on the inside. That's what we did. I'll tell you honestly, I would have loved to have gone outside a few times, but Brenda was anxious about it. And also in the fall, the winds are strong, and they were always, some front was always coming through, and it was a narrow window. So we just stayed inside and we made it work. Going north, as I mentioned, in the spring is much easier. You don't have as many fronts. Every 3 to 4 days in the fall, a cold front rolls off the East Coast and goes blasting down towards the Bahamas. And it's absolutely relentless. And as a front comes through, the wind clocks. It goes from the south to the southeast, southwest, northwest, west, and then northeast, and then back around to the southwest again. And that's just a standard routine. So if you want to do a run offshore, you got to time it. You got to make sure you're ready to go. And provisioning is easier before you leave. It's much easier to go to Walmart or wherever you want to, and pick up everything and just get it. Lugging 12 rolls of toilet paper on your back when you're walking to a market down in Georgetown or something, it's just not that convenient. So we tried to fill the boat with as much as we could. And if you don't eat it at home, you probably won't eat it on the boat. So be careful. We ended up the first year, we thought, well, we'll have lots of canned carrots or, canned peas, it'll be great. And we came home with all of those and eventually threw them away. Get yourself a good wheel cart for provisions. You may look a little bit like a bag lady walking down the street, but in the cruising community, there'll be other people doing the same thing because you're going to be walking pretty much everywhere. And bring lots of Ziploc bags, and everything you get, put it in a Ziploc because it's a humid environment. Everything will go stale if you don't. Maybe even double Ziploc it. And we just use those bags again and again. And you're going to lose stuff. In fact, when we sold our first boat, after we'd had it for 6 or 7 years, we found stuff we didn't even know we had. And in fact, when we bought the current boat, it wasn't until 4 years after we bought it that I discovered there was a case of wine under the front cabin, and it was well past its prime.
It had been shaken.
It had been shaken, yes, it was. So it's good to have a list. You will be amazed at how much stuff you can cram into your boat, and this is just the beginning of it. And especially if you're going to go to the Bahamas, anything that's light, anything that's bulky, you buy it in advance. And I will say that, and you'll see my my tortilla triangle chip there. No matter how well you package tortillas, they don't stay crispy. But you can bake them in the oven and they'll get a little bit better. But so this is us heading down the East River. I recommend you do that. There's nothing quite like going through New York. And keep in mind that on the entire trip, these ships are going to be everywhere. And we saw the Staten Island ferry, and as we waved goodbye to our son who was standing at the battery, and Brenda was crying, and it's like, I'm never going to see him again. I didn't put that picture in. So I'm going to talk a little bit about just distances. And the longest run you have to do to get from here to there is from Sandy Hook to Atlantic City, and that's 70 nautical miles. What we would do is we would go there, hang out right inside down near Atlantic Highlands, and then leave just at dawn, and then arrive at Atlantic City and go in the dark. It's easier. We found it easier to leave in light, or at least in when it's getting light, going around Sandy Hook. It's a narrow channel and there's a lot of shift traffic. We did that during the day, but getting into Atlantic City, there's very minimal commercial traffic, and it's a very wide entrance, very easy to get into. And then another 35 miles past that is Cape May. We stopped there too, because it was just nice. And frankly, after we had done that long run and we pushed all the way from Essex all the way down to Atlantic City and Cape May, we just decided we would hang out and relax. We were not in a rush. This was not a delivery. This was a trip. And then Cape May to Hampton, that's a long trip. That's 150 nautical miles. In our particular case, what we did is we went up the Delaware, and that's a whole nother story. We have to catch the tide, and there's a lot of ship traffic, but it's well marked, and it's something you can do. And going through the C&D Canal is really a hoot. So I'm not giving those distances here, but I'm just talking about it from an offshore standpoint. So from Hampton to Beaufort, you have to pass around Cape Hatteras if you can't go inside. It's 220 nautical miles. That's a long way, but I recommend you do the inside run. It is really a beautiful, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. And then from Beaufort, the next stop you have is Charleston. Unless you might stop in Wina Bay, but there's really nothing there. It's a big entrance, and there's a lot of mega yachts go. There's quite a large refit marina up there, but all you're going to do is go inside, anchor, wait, and then leave. Because if you can't do the ICW below that for whatever reason, because of draft or mast height, you're going to have to go right back out again. And then your next run from Charleston to Savannah is 80 miles. And then Savannah's 20 miles up the river. But you can stop in Thunderbolt, which is very close to the ocean, and that is a quick bus ride up to Savannah. We did go up to Savannah, and we actually had quite a harrowing experience because we picked up a large polypropylene tarp in our propeller. Meanwhile,
It was right after Hurricane Sandy, and there was just all kinds of junk in the rivers and in the ICW. You know, trees, and this happened to be a big black tarp.
why don't you tell them about that ship that was bearing down on us?
Well, this is a wonderful example of what it's like to go down the ICW. Everyone will help you. And when you bump into a boat that you've seen ahead of you and then behind you and ahead of you again, when you end up in the same harbor, you become friends because you've watched each other all day. You've gone through bridges together. And so we became friends with a couple on a boat, and they were very experienced. They had just brought their boat back from several years in the Med. And we called them, they were beside us, and I said that the engine died and we couldn't get it started and we didn't know what was wrong. It was the tarp wrapped around the propeller. And they motored up to us, and we tied up side by side. And I was on the helm and Bob was on the deck. And this new friend of ours, we were on the radio together, and he told me every move to make, and he put us on a dock with no damage. And later on, he said that he was monitoring both the channel we were speaking to each other on, as well as channel 13, channel 9, listening to the ship that was bearing down on both of us. And he said he heard someone on the ship say, "You see that little boat up ahead?" And the helmsman said, "Yeah, I'm not worried about it. I'm just going to push it off with my bow wave."
Well, actually, there's a slight, what happened was there was a tugboat in front of, this was a 900-foot freighter. And there were two tugs, big ones, 100-foot tugs. And what the guy was planning to do was to turn his stern towards us and use his prop wash to push us out of the way. But anyway, it was really intimidating. But for Brenda's point, there's always people that will help you along the way. And that's why I emphasize the idea of going to these rendezvous and meeting people along the way.
So I should mention that the waters were quite messy and dirty after Hurricane Sandy. So when we got tied up to a dock in downtown Savannah, Bob had to go diving and get that mess off our propeller. He said he had about 6 inches of visibility.
Actually, it was even worse than that. I wore my mask, and even though the glass on my mask was touching my propeller, I couldn't see. There was literally like 1 inch of visibility, and the tarp was a big tarp. But anyway, we made it, but there was someone to help us. But there's always options available to you. So I won't go through all of the distances in great detail, except to say that pretty much when you're going down the East Coast, there's lots of entrances, but the very few that can handle a sailboat. Most of them are not. They have Class A, B, and C. Class A is the big ones like Charleston and Savannah and St. Mary's and so forth. Then you have Class B, like are okay, but not great. And then class C, which are only for boats with 2 or 3 foot of draft. And so you need to assume that if you're going outside, it's going to be probably 70 to 100 miles. So in those cases, you need to be prepared to do an overnight run. Once you get to Florida, there's still decent distance between them. St. Mary's, which is right on the Georgia-Florida border, to Fort Canaveral is 155 miles. And even that one's probably not one you're going to want to go in, because you got to go through a lock. And if they happen to be planning a launch, which happens a lot, they're going to close that area. Port Canaveral to Lake Worth, another 105 miles. These are long distances, and you have to stay inside of the Gulf Stream, which is only a few miles offshore once you get down there. But it can be done. Of course, what presentation would be appropriate without the Thomas Point Light off of Annapolis? It's beautiful, and you'll probably have a chance to see that. And you're going to see a lot of amazing things. This is one of the old Trumpies. We've seen this boat. I've forgotten which one it is, but we've seen this. I think it's Puritan. We've seen her multiple times. And in fact, when Craig and I were on the New York Yacht Club cruise 2 years ago, we were on the sister ship to this boat for a reception. It was quite something. It's great going as you go down, going past the naval base in Portsmouth, or across from Portsmouth, and they're pretty remarkable. And here we have one, I guess, I don't know if this winter storage, but it's hard to imagine them picking a boat out of the water that's that big, but it's unbelievable the amount of hardware down there. There's 2 ways to get through down towards, for the first leg. One would be the Dismal Swamp, and then another one is called the Virginia Cut. I'm just going to talk a little bit about the Dismal Swamp because it's a remarkable a piece of engineering. It was started actually originally conceived of by George Washington as part of a company he was involved with. It's a 22-mile long canal linking the Chesapeake Bay and Albemarle Sound to the south. And it took them a long time to build this, 12 years. It was unfortunately built by slave labor and was originally done with the idea of getting cedar out to make cedar shingles. And they did. They did a lot of that. They did a lot of logging in that area, and that was one of the major points of that. It has a 6-foot depth. There's a lot of crap on the bottom, so if you have like we do 6.5-foot draft, you're going to bump stuff and it's going to pop up and hit your rudder. So you got to go kind of slow, and if you're going behind someone else, you probably want to give them some distance so those logs can settle back down on the bottom again. We never had any damage, but you feel the boat shudder now and again as you nick a log. There's 2 locks, one at each end with a 7-foot rise and fall, and it's quite a treat. This is the Deep Creek Lock, which is the northern end, and it opens up just a couple of times a day. We've been through it a whole bunch of times. This gentleman, his name's Robert. Unfortunately, Robert, I learned, died unexpectedly October of 2020. He was a remarkable guy, and every morning he would be there early for the 8 o'clock opening and invite people into his little shed to have a donut, compliments of him. He's just the nicest guy. You'll notice as you're doing the ICW, a lot of boats with what they call the ICW mustache. The water is tannin colored, and so it will stain your boat, but a little bit of oxalic acid will take it right off. And while you're going through that, you're gonna encounter your very first free dockage at the Welcome Center on the Dismal Swamp. And every night they actually close the whole thing once you're in, until the 8 o'clock the next morning. No one's going to be going through, so they raft the boats up all the way across the canal. And we've been there when there's been a dozen or more boats that are anchored, tied up one after another. It's a wonderful spot to go. It's like driving a car going down the ICW. You're going to steer pretty much, and it's not straight. You can't set the autopilot. Here's an example of just one area where you go from point to point to point, and sometimes it's very, very windy. On the south side of the Dismal Swamp Canal is St. Mary's? No, Elizabeth City. City, sorry. And they have free dockage for a couple of days, and there's even, at least when we were there were some retired gentlemen that were there to help pull into your slip. And the slips are marked to say 14-foot wide, 12-foot wide, 6-foot wide, whatever it is. And you can stay there. And one of the times we were there, the mayor actually came down and addressed us, because every night there were more than 4 or 5 boats, they would throw a cocktail party with free wine and beer and talk to you about all the great restaurants you really should go and buy stuff at. So it's a pretty remarkable change of sort of town personality from the idea of how much are you going to spend to, oh, please, please, please stay with us. Please be our guest. And you're going to see beautiful stuff along the way.
I'm just reacting to the
Oh, okay.
Sorry.
It is an ethereal, beautiful place to be. And when you get down near Beaufort, these are wild horses that are just going to be wandering along the side. When we were going through the Dismal Swamp, a turkey flew across and almost hit the bow of the boat. And we've had friends that have seen bears swimming across the ICW in front of them. And as you get further south and you get the long leaf yellow pine, it is just a beautiful place. And you'll be anchored in places that you feel like it could be 100 years ago. And there's just no beating, sitting on your boat and watching something like this happen. This is a view from Elizabeth City. And bring along whatever it makes you happy. We always have flowers on the boat, and of course wine. And we try to make a point of making it a home. And you will see beautiful homes. I mean, this is revolutionary, beautiful history throughout the entire trip. This is where our country was born. And to be able to see that at a leisurely 6-knot pace and enjoy everything. This is a spot right on the Chesapeake, just one of our many places. And bring along what you enjoy doing. If you like to knit, if you enjoy playing cards. When Brenda gets anxious, she plays solitaire, and I would say she plays solitaire frequently after a rough run. And there are so many interesting places to anchor. Here's what's an oxbow, where just a spot that you can see that running down the center of the picture is a pink line. That's called the magenta line, and that tells you where the ICW is. And then you just pull off, and the chart will tell you, anchor here, anchor there. And you'll be in good company, these beautiful boats that you'll see going down. But of course, in many areas, you're also going to be passed by great big boats. As you get past some of the low country areas where there's shrimping going on, especially down in Albemarle Sound, you'll see these out in the evenings fishing, and when the shrimp come up to the surface, and there's lots of opportunities to buy shrimp right off of the boat. As you're going along, there's Camp Lejeune. You're going to be taking your run right smack through the middle of a military base, and maybe if you're lucky, you'll see a hovercraft go roaring by. But in fact, when we were there, we saw these guys looking pretty serious. They do a lot of maneuvers. It's a very active place, and there's actually one of the best anchorages along that area is right in the middle of the base, and at one end of the anchorage is a cement ramp for the hovercraft to go up and down on maneuvers. One of our favorite places, and there's so many wonderful places, is Charleston. We stayed for a whole week in Charleston, and there you just haven't lived until you get up in the morning and walk to Harris Teeter's, buy something to eat, and then walk into the historic area. And to see these just spectacular homes, there's just no end to the beautiful places to see. Okay, there we go.
Oh.
Whoops, whoop.
Quick ending.
There we go. Let's go back to where we were here. Slideshow from here. Okay. Brenda does a lot of work with her hands, knitting and so forth. In fact, she's sitting here knitting right now. But we just love local crafts, and these are baskets inspired by work that was done, brought over from Africa. And these are very, very intricate baskets, quite beautiful. We were able to buy one that was, I think, pretty much close to museum quality, and it's just this beautiful basket. Brenda, what are they made of?
They're made of sweetgrass. It's one of the marsh grasses that grows, and they're not woven. They are, it's a sewing technique called coiling. They do a beautiful job of it.
They really are. And in fact, Brenda, we have 10 teeny little baskets that she commissioned while we were there and got someone to make to use as Christmas ornaments. And we have a little tiny tree that's just covered with these beautiful baskets. But there's just no end to the beautiful architecture as you go down. And as you enter Florida and through the Carolinas, you'll see these beautiful bridges. And let me tell you, you're going to go through a lot of bridges. And this is just outside of St. Augustine. And unfortunately, if you have to come in from the ocean, that's a very tricky inlet. So this is pretty much going to be limited to those that can do the ICW. But it was the first cities founded in America. And this is a fort that's still in use. It's a very popular tourist spot. And we really enjoyed one of our favorite cities to visit. It's pretty spectacular. And they have, you may have heard of Flagler. He was the guy who was one partner in Standard Oil, and he took his money and decided to build a railroad to Florida and start the tourist business in Florida. And he built the railroad to nowhere, which was out to Key West, to the idea of trading to get down to the Panama Canal directly from a railroad. That didn't quite work out. He was famous for saying, "How do you make $1 million in the railroad business?" He said, "Start out with 100 million." But now this is Flagler College. Actually, this is the Flagler Museum.
Yeah.
It looks just like Flagler College. It's across the street. These are converted from the first grand hotels in Florida, and they are grand. Along the way, you're going to see a lot of wildlife. I mean, you don't see all that many dolphins, for example, in the Bahamas or even in the Caribbean, but boy, along the ICW, there are dolphins everywhere. And to me, it was a particular thrill when we saw our first pelican, and just the most crazy looking bird. And then you see manatees. There's also alligators, although we never saw an alligator, but there's a lot of them. But whether it's wildlife or just the crazy local life, you're going to see all kinds of characters. Around the holidays, they have all sorts of parades in the evening, so you can pick up a mooring or anchor along the ICW, and when it starts to get dark, you're going to see all these boats go by. And this one was crazy. They were singing "It's a Pirate's Life for Me" over and over and over. And as it got light in the evening, or it got dark, the boats were lit from top to bottom. Of course, some of the boats are really fancy. This is actually Rambler 88. At the time was one of the fastest racing boats in the world. You can see that guy standing on the stern. That's a really big boat. The new Rambler is even bigger than that. And then you're getting down into Florida, where this is the play places of the rich and famous, and that this is a thing that attaches to the back of a jet ski, and they put the jet ski, water goes through that hose, and you can actually fly up in the air. And he was doing a flip. So if you have enough money, you can do all kinds of crazy stuff. But money or not, you can anchor, and this is right inside of an inlet down near Fort Pierce. And this is one place where we had a really harrowing moment when we anchored late in the evening, and the holding was okay. And as the tide shifted late in the day from an outbound, which had us pointing in the direction of this boat, to inbound with a thunderstorm, our anchor did not reset. And at 2 o'clock in the morning, we looked up to see that bridge right off of our transom, and Brenda miraculously saved us from going under the bridge. So sometimes things can be hairy, but really, all in all, going down the ICW is a very controlled process. But I think the point I want to make here is that this is a lifetime, a lifestyle. This is a real opportunity to do something so unique. And yet at the same time, you don't want to forget important occasions. And Brenda just hates this picture. I love it. But these are people, that's Bill and Maureen, or Bill behind there, which has addressed our group recently. They're of course down in Antigua now, but you make friends along the way that you will have we met them in 2012, and hardly a month goes by that we don't talk to them. Overall, we made it from New York to Florida. We never spent a night underway. You know, we did arrive in Atlantic City in the dark, but that was it. Other than that, we were always tucked in the evening. And there is nothing like seeing the historic coast at 6 knots or 7 or 5, depending upon, and sometimes 0 when you run aground, which we did a lot. But you'll become part of a kind of a movable neighborhood, a cruising community that forms up. And as Brenda said, the people that helped us get onto a dock in Savannah, you know, we had been buddying with them off and on for a month, and there they were right next to us when we needed them. And there's plenty of places to leave your boat and head home if you want to. And unlike the Northeast, it's not expensive. And so I recommend that if you haven't, you should definitely join the Seven Seas Cruising Association. They are the gateway to the cruising lifestyle. And of course, the group that I spend an awful lot of my time on, developing blue water skills through the Salty Dog Sailing Association. So after you do that, you'll have to decide what's next. You're going to go to the Bahamas, you're going to leave your boat, just hang out. One way or the other, I think you'll find that you will look back and say, I am so glad that I didn't wait to do this some other time. Any questions?